Welcome back to the Crypto Channel, everyone. My name is Josh, and right now, Bitcoin is bouncing from my exact level of support in the short term, as the Bitcoin dominance is technically still bouncing as well in the short term, but the Bitcoin and crypto funding rates are now starting to move towards the negative direction, which is something that we need to pay attention to, while Ethereum is technically still playing out the bearish divergence, but Chainlink is now bouncing from this exact level of support in the short term. So I'll be talking about all of that and more later in the video, so definitely watch to the end. First of all, starting off on the weekly Bitcoin price chart, and the super trend indicator is still sitting in the green, indicating a larger bull market. But of course, on this weekly Bitcoin price chart, it is still looking likely, as I've recorded in this video, that perhaps at the end of this week, which is just in a matter of hours from now, at this next weekly candle close, it is looking likely we could confirm this new bearish divergence on the weekly Bitcoin price chart. Because we can see that right now in the weekly Bitcoin RSI, this is starting to reject in the short term, actually confirming that lower high in place in the RSI, especially at this next weekly candle close, once again in just a matter of hours from now and less than 1 day from now. And the last time we saw a bearish divergence play out, it was between these two highs right here, between the high in around April 2024 and the high in around December 2024. We saw a massive bearish divergence between those two highs, between the price and the RSI, and what came next was a significant pullback, a larger slowdown for the price of Bitcoin over the next multiple months, from around December 2024 all the way through towards pretty much the end of March 2025. And then, like I've said recently here on the channel, we also had a small bearish divergence right here in the price of Bitcoin between the price and the RSI on the weekly time frame, and that was around mid-2023, and the outcome of that bearish divergence was also a pullback that lasted for around 1 to 2 months, give or take. And then, of course, the time before that was at the end of the 2021 bull market, just at the beginning of the 2022 bear market. And so, of course, a bearish divergence on the weekly time frame by itself does not always cause a bear market. Sometimes it's just a pullback before ultimately continuing the bull market later on. But at the very least, it is telling us that we could likely still be due to see some more bearish price action at some point over the next 1 or 2 months as a likely scenario. And if we're taking a look at this 3-day Bitcoin price chart, like I said in my last video, we've technically now confirmed a new bearish crossover in the 3-day Bitcoin MACD. So despite the current short-term bounce, technically speaking, the momentum is still currently pointing more in the bearish direction, at least as of right now. And of course, on this 3-day Bitcoin price chart, we're getting closer towards possibly invalidating this cup and handle pattern. So honestly, I'd not really rely on this pattern for too much longer. And if we're taking a look at this daily Bitcoin price chart, the price of Bitcoin is now pretty much exactly bouncing from the exact level of support that I've been targeting since these higher prices here. And so obviously, since right around here, I've been saying that, of course, we have a lot of weakness in the short term, as shown here in the daily Bitcoin RSI. This is basically a sign of weakness, losing strength, losing momentum right now in the price of Bitcoin. And once again, like I've been saying every day over the last couple of weeks, the last time we saw this in the daily Bitcoin RSI was around end of May, entering into June this year. And what happened back then in the price of Bitcoin was indeed a pullback in the price, not necessarily a bear market or anything, but at least a bit more of a pullback in the price of Bitcoin, showing a lot of weakness, at least in the shorter term. But once again, as I always say, we need to pay attention to key points of support and resistance, where the price will most likely reject from in the case of resistance, or possibly bounce from in the case of support. And usually previous resistance becomes new support, which is why I've been targeting this area right here in between roughly 110,000 to 112,000. So a lot of support starting at around 112,000 is what I've been saying since before we hit that level. And then obviously the moment the price of Bitcoin pretty much exactly hit 112,000, and even just a few dollars below 112,000, the moment we ran into my exact level of support, we're now currently bouncing from this exact level. And so obviously this is a very normal reaction to running into support. Usually we end up seeing bounces from support, just like how we see rejections from resistance a lot of the time. And so right now in the short term, that is simply the situation. We're currently seeing a bit of a short-term bounce, and this could likely last for the remainder of the weekend, maybe even another couple of days entering into the new week. But of course, as the US stock market opens up again in the new week, I will be paying attention to the US stock market, because for example, if the S&P 500 or the Nasdaq 100 starts dumping again in the new week when the stock market opens back up again, and also if we continue to see net outflows for the Bitcoin ETFs when the stock market opens back up again, ultimately that could cause some more bearish pressure for Bitcoin. And so ultimately continue to expect support at around 112,000, but really in between 110,000 to 112,000 as the area of support to focus on right now, which means we're likely now going to hold above this area, at least for a little bit here in the short term, but we're not necessarily right now seeing a massive regain in the bullish momentum. As we can clearly see, we're still seeing a little bit of bearish momentum right now and still this massive bearish divergence on the weekly time frame. And so perhaps we see a little bit more of a short-term relief here, just holding above this support for a few days, just in the short term once again. But overall, the current situation, when we're talking about the next few weeks or the next 1 month, that sort of time frame is technically looking a little bit more bearish than it is bullish based on all of these other charts here. And if we're zooming further into the immediate short term, taking a look at the 4-hour Bitcoin price chart, obviously we could see the short-term bounce that is currently playing out from this exact level of support here, but we're potentially about to retest this previous descending line of support, which could potentially now act as new resistance to watch out for, and that's sitting at around 114.4k. And so basically, as the price of Bitcoin approaches just above 114,000, especially around 114,500, once again, just expect a bit of short-term struggle and a possible short-term rejection from around that area. But overall, if we break out above that level, breaking out above around 14,500 or 114,500, I should say, then in that situation, we could likely see a continued bullish relief, potentially up towards 116,500 as the next short-term target. But it's important to understand that even if that were to play out, whether we reject at 114,500, or let's just say if we make it to 116,500 and struggle or reject from around there, either way, we're technically still within some bearish price structure, forming a bearish trend just on the 4-hour time frame. Once again, on the weekly time frame, we're technically still within a larger bull market, forming higher lows and higher highs on the weekly time frame. But on the short term here, on just the 4-hour time frame, we're in a short-term bearish trend, forming lower highs and lower lows. And as we can clearly see, even during a bearish trend, we can see multiple bounces, bullish moves in the short term during a bearish trend, bouncing from key points of support along the way towards the downside. And right now, once again, we're bouncing from the exact level of support that I've already been targeting over the last few days. So that's potentially the situation. Yes, in the immediate short term, maybe for a couple of days, this can provide some relief for Bitcoin and also some of the altcoin market, but I'll still remain cautious for Bitcoin and crypto right now, considering once again, we're not really seeing a lot of bullish momentum. We're simply just bouncing from a key point of support, which is very normal to see even during a bearish trend. So at least in my situation, not financial advice, I'll still be potentially looking out for short positions. For example, if we run into a key point of resistance and start actually rejecting from a key point of resistance, in that situation, that would be a possible entry signal into a short position, not financial advice. And then, like I said in my last video, if we break below a key point of support, that could also be another possible entry signal into a short position. But right now, we're currently bouncing from this key point of support, so still waiting for a possible entry here. And if we're taking a look at the Bitcoin liquidation heat map, we can see in the immediate short term, we have a very small amount of liquidity at around 111,500, and also a small amount at around 115,000, and still quite a lot of liquidity building at around 120,000. And so honestly, other than that 120k level, the Bitcoin liquidation heat map is not really giving us too much information, at least for now. And clearly between the current price and 120,000, we have a lot of resistance that we would need to break out above before we could actually reach 120,000, which means it's still unlikely it would go straight towards 120k based on this reason alone. It would have to ideally see some other indications start to flip bullish again. And so those are the exact levels I'm watching for the price of Bitcoin in terms of support and resistance, and what my expectations are for the next just a few days in the shorter term, and also the slightly longer term, the mid to long term, talking about the next few weeks or months as a likely scenario. And of course, if you want to trade any of these moves in the price of Bitcoin or any other crypto, you have to be set up ready to go on a crypto exchange. And personally, I'm taking a lot of my crypto trades over on BTNX, so I'll make sure to leave a link to BTNX below this video in the description and in the pinned comment. And if you use that link, it'll take you to this page right here where you can claim some massive trading and deposit bonuses. For example, up to $40,000 in trading bonuses. And also, if you deposit just $1,000, you get a $200 bonus into your BTNX account. Basically, free money you can use to actually trade over on BTNX, which you can only claim using that link below this video to actually make your BTNX account. So if you're going to be trading crypto anyway, or preparing to take the next trading opportunity, you might as well get set up ready to go using that first link below this video to take advantage of these major bonuses here. And in case you're wondering, BTNX is a no KYC exchange, which means you can access it from basically any country in the world without needing any KYC. But as always, check your local regulations when it comes to trading crypto. And for whatever reason, if you don't want BitNex as an exchange, there's also 2bit as another option out there, another exchange that I also trade on. So I'll also make sure to leave a link to 2bit below this video. And if you use that link, it'll take you to this page where there's currently a massive $3 million trading competition happening right now over on 2bit. And in case you're wondering, if you use the links below this video, you can also get some massive deposit and trading bonuses over on 2bit, but only if you use that link. And also 2bit, in case you're wondering, is a no KYC exchange as well. But with that being said, taking a look at the Bitcoin dominance. Right now, the Bitcoin dominance is still currently bouncing from this major area of support, at least in the short term. And so in case you're new to all of this basically means that there's not currently an altcoin season happening right now. An altcoin season is basically when we see a major dump in the Bitcoin dominance. So for example, if this bearish divergence ultimately continues to play out with a major breakdown below this area of support in the Bitcoin dominance, that would be extremely bullish for the altcoin market, as I talked about back up here just before this drop to the downside in the Bitcoin dominance. But at least for now, while this is still the situation, bouncing in the Bitcoin dominance here, once again, it's not really good news for the altcoin market. Now, of course, if Bitcoin is bouncing in the short term, that can help some altcoins in the short term against the US dollar. But if the Bitcoin dominance is also bouncing, it means altcoins are not really outperforming Bitcoin, at least for now. And if we're taking a look at the Bitcoin and crypto funding rates, we can see that right now the Bitcoin funding rates are relatively neutral and even starting to dip below neutral towards the negative direction. But at least for now, in the altcoin market, we're starting to see more and more funding rates actually flip negative, especially the Solana funding rates right now across multiple different exchanges are already flipping negative. And in case you're new to all of this, basically when the funding rates are negative, that means there's currently a high demand to short this crypto asset here with negative funding rates. And so basically the short positions are having to pay a slight premium and having to pay funding rates to the long positions. Whereas on the other end of things, when the funding rates are positive, the long positions are actually paying funding fees to the short positions. And so usually the further the funding rates go negative, the more likely a possible short squeeze could actually happen. And the further they go in the positive direction, if they get really overheated, then essentially there's an increasing chance of a long squeeze happening. In other words, a flash crash to wipe out a bunch of over leveraged long positions. But in the case of these funding rates right here, slowly flipping towards the negative direction, at least for now, they're not massively negative. They're only just starting to flip negative. But basically, the further negative these goes, once again, the more likely a short squeeze could possibly happen. So just keep that in mind, especially for, say, Solana right now and any of these other cryptos where you notice there's more and more negative funding rates. I'll not necessarily be eager to short these crypto assets, at least for now, just in case we see a little bit more of a bounce. It could start to liquidate some highly leveraged short positions. And obviously, this is what I talked about over the last couple of days. I mentioned with multiple crypto assets in these videos that the prices are starting to run into some key points of support, which means I'll potentially just be patient for another possible entry point, maybe in a few days from now, after we first see a little bit of a bounce. And right now for Bitcoin here, we're playing out that bounce exactly as I've been talking about. And if we're taking a look at Ethereum on the 3-day time frame, obviously, at least for now, Ethereum is still struggling and rejecting from this significant area of resistance, still sitting in between roughly 3.9k to 4.1k. And obviously, I've been warning about this rejection from this area for weeks now on the channel, since even before we reached that area of resistance on the price chart. So basically, there's nothing else to add here for Ethereum on the 3-day time frame. It's still playing out as I've been predicting. And if we're taking a look at this daily time frame, the price is very close to running into this area of support that I've been talking about, in between around 3.2k to 3.3k. And at least so far, we're bouncing from basically just above 3.3k, closer towards around 3340 to 3350. And of course, with Bitcoin experiencing a bounce from this exact level of support, that's also going to help a lot of the altcoin market, at least in the shorter term, with just a short-term bounce. So that's simply what we're seeing in the immediate short term for Ethereum, currently a bounce from close to this area of support, but simply just following what Bitcoin is doing in the short term. But overall, if we're taking a look at this daily Ethereum price chart, technically speaking, this bearish divergence is still currently active. And so what a bearish divergence technically means is that we're most likely going to see a lack in bullish momentum. Usually it plays out in the form of either, at best, just a sideways consolidation, but oftentimes a bit of a pullback in the price. And obviously for pretty much around a week now, we've been experiencing a pullback exactly as I've been warning about. And once again, this could likely continue at some point in the next 1 week or so, maybe another 1 or 2 weeks as a likely scenario. But of course, in the immediate short term, we can see little bounces here and there during a short-term bearish trend. So right now, we're potentially in a similar situation to what we saw back here during June this year. And so of course, that was not the end of the bull market. The much larger or longer term trend was technically still bullish. We're just in a short-term bearish trend or a pullback in the price essentially during the larger bullish trend. But during the short-term bearish trend, during the pullback, we saw even smaller little bounces in the immediate short term during the pullback. So right now, that's basically what we are currently seeing. And so like I said, for Bitcoin, maybe this little bounce here lasts for another few hours, another couple of days, once again, just in the short term. But overall, when we're talking about the next 1 or 2 weeks, it is quite likely we could remain a little bit more bearish for Ethereum as a likely scenario. But once again, technically speaking, we're still within a larger bull market, but we also still have to watch out for this significant area of resistance here in between around 3.9k to 4.1k. So even if the price eventually at some point gets back up towards that area, expect a lot of struggle around that area. And as for a possible short position opportunity, let's just say if we still think this bearish divergence is ultimately going to play out maybe for another week, give or take, maybe a little bit longer, another 2 weeks, give or take, then ultimately I'll be watching out for a previous level of support to flip into new resistance. And if we start to see a rejection from that level, that could possibly be an entry signal into a short position. And the level I'll be watching is in between 3.5k to 3.6k. So that will be an important test in the coming hours or days for Ethereum. And so once again, I'd now expect resistance in between 3.5k to 3.6k, but only if we start to struggle and start to reject from that area. Once again, that would be a possible signal to open a short position, not financial advice. And if we're taking a look at Solana on the 2-day time frame, like I just said earlier, the Solana funding rates are obviously flipping negative, which is pointing towards perhaps a little bit more of a short-term bounce for Solana, with a lot of traders going short on Solana right now. And so honestly, I'll not be surprised if we ultimately see a retest of this key level on the price chart here, sitting at around 167. So I'll now expect resistance in between roughly 167 to 170. And once again, it's possible we soon see a retest of that area. But if we start to struggle or reject from that area, then obviously that is bearish price structure and a possible signal to add or perhaps open a short position, not financial advice. And in terms of support to watch out for, obviously we've just developed some new short-term support here at roughly around 156, give or take. And we do have some significant support in this area in between around 143 to 146. And only if the price ultimately breaks out back above around 167 to 170, in that situation, the next resistance would be at around 180. And of course, significant resistance in between around 190 to 200. And Solana, along with a lot of the major altcoins out there, follows very similar price action to what Ethereum and Bitcoin are doing. So for example, if Bitcoin continues just a little bit more of a short-term bounce, maybe over the next 1 or 2 days, and then maybe ultimately sees some more weakness or possible pullback later on in the next couple of weeks, Solana will likely play out something similar. So definitely keep an eye on what Bitcoin is doing to figure out what is likely going to happen for Solana and a lot of the altcoins. And if we're taking a look at the price of XRP on the weekly time frame, XRP is potentially just hours away from further confirming the significant bearish divergence on the weekly XRP price chart, because we've already confirmed the higher highs in the price in the candle closes, but we're potentially just about to fully confirm this lower high in place in the weekly XRP RSI. And the last time we saw anything similar to what we're seeing right now in the weekly XRP RSI, basically a massive bearish divergence on the weekly time frame, was around the beginning of 2021 or almost the end of 2020. We could see right here between these two highs, between the high in around December 2020 and around May 2021, we had higher highs in the price and lower highs in the weekly XRP RSI. And ultimately what came next was quite a significant pullback in the price of XRP. But of course, during that pullback here, we did see a decent bounce back towards the upside along the way towards the downside. So as we could see from roughly around these highs at the candle closes to this low, that was around a 60 to 70% pullback in the price of XRP over around just 3 months. But during that pullback, we actually saw a bounce of over 50% back towards the upside. upside during the larger pullback. And so just understand that XRP is subject to very volatile moves. It's very normal to see volatile moves in the price of XRP, both towards the upside and to the downside. But overall, with this bearish divergence potentially about to further confirm in just a matter of hours from now with this next weekly candle close, once again, this is not really good news when we're talking about the next 1 or 2 months as a very likely scenario. Once again, in the short term, we can see decent bounces here and there, but the larger situation for the next 1 or 2 months is not looking too good based on this massive bearish divergence. And if we're taking a look at the daily XRP price chart, when it comes to support and resistance to watch out for, as I've recorded this video, we're now currently retesting a previous key area on the price chart, which was previous support just here and also previous resistance, and that's sitting in between around $2.90 to $3. So we could potentially now start to find resistance in that area in between $2.90 to $3. So obviously, at least for now, expect some struggle around this area and a possible risk of a rejection here, but only if we actually start to struggle and start to see a rejection here, start some red candles, for example, from within this area. Only then would I potentially look at a new entry into another short position, only if we start to actually reject from this area right here, proving it as new resistance. But currently, we're still just in the test phase, actually testing this area, not yet confirming it properly as new resistance. But obviously, we just have to wait and see if we actually confirm this as new resistance, because once again, we're still just testing this area. We've not yet confirmed it properly as new resistance or anything. But if we ultimately see a confirmed breakout back above ideally $3 with candle closes above $3 and actually holding that as new support, in that situation would likely see a continued bullish relief at least up towards around $3.15 to $3.20, and then above that we have more resistance closer towards around $3.40. But overall, on the daily XRP price chart, it is very clear, if we're remaining unbiased, it's clear that we have actually seen a decent breakdown in the bullish price structure. So we can actually compare what we're seeing right now very closely to what we saw back here near the beginning of this year, around January entering into February this year, because obviously right at the very beginning of this year, we saw a major bullish move in the price of XRP towards the end or around mid to end of January. And then ultimately we started to cool off a little bit, but then the moment we broke below this key level right here, and then even if we saw a decent bounce along the way towards the downside, we did see a major breakdown in the price structure, breaking below multiple key points of support. But remember, XRP can be very volatile, as we could clearly see even during this larger pullback that we saw between January and around April this year. Yes, that entire period was overall a bearish trend, pulling back in the price, but during the bearish trends, we did see some major bounces along the way towards the downside. And so what this tells us is that we should be very careful using high leverage when it comes to XRP. Personally, I'd like to stick to relatively low leverage, ideally nothing more than 10x, usually below 10x when it comes to XRP, because we don't really need high leverage when it comes to XRP if we're trading XRP, because it already has some very volatile moves, as we can see. And so that's why I'll just have to wait to see where this short-term bounce actually takes us. Once again, we could reject it around $2.90 to $3. We could even come all the way back up towards roughly $3.20. That's a possibility. But overall, with this major breakdown in the price structure, looking similar to what we saw back here, at least when we're talking about the next 1 month, give or take, we're still looking more bearish than we are bullish. It's just important to consider we will likely find bounces along the way during that larger pullback. And if we're taking a look at the price of Chainlink on the daily time frame, it's a similar story for Chainlink. Obviously, we've seen a major breakdown in the price structure here, breaking below a very important area on the price chart. But just in the immediate short term, Chainlink is following the rest of the crypto market, following what Bitcoin is doing right now, playing out just a short-term bounce. But Chainlink is not just randomly bouncing at some random price level, it's bouncing at my exact price target, so almost the nearest cent, as we could see here for the price of Chainlink. Basically, ever since we broke below around $17.50 to $18, I've been saying once we break below $17.50, expect a quick move down towards exactly $15.50, and then expect support at $15.50. And what we're seeing right now is exactly that, to basically the nearest cent. And so obviously the moment we lost that $17.50 support level right there, that was a very bearish signal for Chainlink. And obviously we ultimately played out a major pullback for Chainlink to my exact price target at $15.50, and currently we're bouncing from that exact level. So once again, as I've already been saying since before we hit that level, continue to expect supports at roughly $15.50, but also now expect a lot of resistance in between $17.50 to $18 if the price were to actually get back to that area. But overall, just in the immediate short term, talking about the next couple of days or so, it is quite likely we'll continue to hold above this area of support at around 1550 and quite possibly see a little bit more of a bounce just in the immediate short term once again, especially if Bitcoin and other crypto assets do the same. Chainlink will likely follow the rest of the crypto market, but Chainlink is potentially in a similar situation right now to what we saw in around June, the first half of June this year. So first of all, we saw a major bullish move basically around April all the way through towards around the middle of May, and then we saw a bit of a sideways consolidation running into key resistance right here, forming a lower high and then ultimately breaking below the key point of support of that consolidation there. And so obviously that price structure is almost identical to what we saw right here near the end of July. And then once we saw that breakdown in the price structure, that set forward a major pullback that was likely going to continue. But of course, during that pullback, we did see a decent bounce along the way towards the downside. And so right now we're potentially just starting that short-term bounce that could maybe last for the next couple of days. And so those are my exact predictions and the exact levels to watch out for on the price chart for Chainlink and the rest of these crypto assets. And of course, once again, if you want to trade any of these moves in the price of any crypto, check out the links below this video to those exchanges if you want to claim those massive bonuses that are only available using those links. And if you want to actually know how you can trade crypto no matter what the price is doing, then make sure to watch these videos popping up right here on your screen. The video in the top left shows you how you can profit from bullish or bearish price action using long positions or short positions, and the video in the bottom left shows you how you can easily profit from choppy sideways price action. But anyway, that is everything that I have to say for today. I really hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next video.